If you want to get the best youth intakes in Football Manager, then look no further than this video, because today a certain someone, me, is going to tell you everything they know about youth intakes to give you the best chance of getting a golden generation come through in your academy. We'll be covering the big things you need to know, to small tips and even busting some myths along the way, and hopefully by the end of it, you guys will be experts and give yourself the chance of getting those next wonder kids coming through at your club. So without further ado, let's get right into it, and we're starting off today in this Borussia Dortmund save. Now hopefully you all know what a youth intake is. If you don't, it's basically the academy players that get generated into your team on a yearly basis, and today I'll be showing you everything you can do to make sure that those players are of the highest ability and the highest potential, in the hopes you'll get a golden academy generation and not just a bunch of duds. So the first thing we need to cover is a bit of a theoretical thing, and it's something that a lot of people don't understand. And that is, no matter what I tell you today, youth intakes are a lottery. Now, what I mean by a lottery, and it's an analogy I always use when we do these videos about youth intakes, is that you're not guaranteed to win every single time. Even if you bought 50 tickets to the raffle, aka follow every tip that I give you in this video, you're not guaranteed to win, but you are increasing your chances, and that's exactly what we'll be talking about today. At the end of the day, these youth intakes will be luck-based, but we can increase our probability of hitting that golden target if we do everything that I show you in today's video. The other thing to note is that every youth intake is relative to your club. For example, if we go to Borussia Dortmund, our best players, if we have a look by ability, if I click it that way, are Kobel, Schlotterbeck, Guirassy, and Pascal Gross. Now they are 4-star players, 3.5-star players, and that's great. But if you don't know, star ratings in Football Manager apply to basically your club and your league. So if you put Guirassy in, I don't know, the Vanarama National League, he's of course going to be a 5-star player, and the same will apply to your youth intakes. The worse your team is and the worse the league you're in, the ratings of your players coming through in your intakes are only relative to that of your team. If you have a 5-star player come through in the Vanarama National League, it doesn't necessarily mean he is a Premier League quality player. He is just going to be a top player for the level that you're currently playing at. So bear both those theoretical things in mind, and now we can cover what we can actually do to increase the chances of those youth players coming through of actually being any good. And the first one, and the most obvious one that many of you might know, we'll get into some more advanced tips later, but the most obvious one is the facilities that you have at your club, which you can see if you go to the club section and then down to facilities. Every club has a different level of 4 things: training facilities, youth coaching, and also your youth recruitment. Now, one common misconception that a lot of people have is that your training facilities are for your first team and your youth facilities are for your under 21s and under 18s. This is incorrect. Your training facilities are for any player that exists in your save, whether that's an under 18 player, under 19, under 21, or in your first team. They will use training facilities. So in terms of affecting your youth intake, your training facilities have no bearing at all. Your youth facilities, though, are the facilities that the players that you can't see are currently using. So imagine you've got an under 15 side and under 14 side. They'll be playing on your youth facilities, and the better the facilities you've got, the better the equipment they've got, the more likely they're going to be to develop into top level players. And therefore, the better your youth facilities, the better the potential of your players when they come through in your youth intake. So if you can increase your youth facilities, you are massively increasing the chances of getting good players come through in your intakes on a yearly basis. On the same way, the academy coaching has an effect only on those players that are currently under the hood waiting to be part of your youth intake. And the better your academy coaching, the better the starting ability of those players that come through. So you can imagine if you combine good youth facilities and good academy coaching, the better those players are going to be when they eventually drop in your youth intakes into your side. And the final one we need to cover is youth recruitment. The better your club's level in the youth recruitment areas, the wider your club can cast its net. If you take Arsenal, for example, if they had okay youth recruitment, it will probably only be players in the London area that they would then sweep up. But if they have excellent or state-of-the-art youth recruitment, what that will then mean is that the net that they're casting to find those good young players is wider, and therefore they might find players in Manchester, in Liverpool, maybe even abroad potentially. The bigger that net, the bigger your youth recruitment, the better the chance you've got of finding those top talents. But of course, it begs the question, how do you get better facilities if you want to improve them? Because the worse that your club is, the less likely you are going to be to have good facilities. Well, if you go into the Club Vision screen, you can then make a board request, and there you will see the youth facilities option in the facilities section. The finance section will show the junior coaching, and in network you will see youth recruitment. Whether they accept these requests is usually based on your club's financial situation, how long long you've been at the club and how important things such as youth recruitment are to a club. In Dortmund's case, obviously they like producing youngsters, so they might be very happy to accept these requests. But the general gist of it is if you're doing well, your club is likely going to let you do these things, whether you're in the 5th tier or the 1st tier. The better your club is doing, the more likely your board are to accept these requests. But this is the simplest thing that many of us know. The better your facilities at your club, the more lottery tickets you are buying to potentially hit that golden generation, and the better players that will hopefully come through on a yearly basis. But now that we know that, what else is affecting your youth intake? Well, one thing that does affect the youth intakes, but maybe not as much as some people think, is your club reputation. Now, I've covered this before in FM24, and many people didn't know this, but there's always been this myth that the better your reputation, the better your youth intakes. In theory, a team like Dortmund will have better youth intakes than, I don't know, who's this club here? Oberhausen, purely because they've got a better reputation. Their reputation is national and Dortmund's is continental. You can see the better it is, the more green this wheel is, I suppose. But that doesn't necessarily have a huge effect on your intakes. What it only does is your reputation acts as a tiebreaker. So in this case, if Oberhausen were right next to Borussia Dortmund and they had the exact same facilities, everything else was exactly the same, then reputation then becomes a tiebreak, which would mean a young player would choose to join Dortmund over Oberhausen. Now, that's not to say that Oberhausen couldn't get a better youth intake than Dortmund, of course not, but it should be noted that the higher your reputation, in theory, the better your chances of getting a youth intake, even if it's only by a tiny margin. And the only way to get that reputation up is to win games, win competitions, and progress your club. If Dortmund was winning the Champions League 5 years on a bounce, that reputation would go higher. So bear all that in mind. Reputation can have an effect, but only as a tiebreaker if every other factor that we consider matches Dortmund's exactly. But there's still plenty of ways to increase the ability of that youth intake, and the next one is to hit the like button on this video. Now, I'm no scientist and I can't prove it exactly, but I have a feeling if you press that like button, and especially that subscribe button, you're going to get a golden generation in your youth intake. So let me know down below if that worked. But in all seriousness, let's now move on to the next thing that affects youth intakes, and this one, I would say, is on an equal level to the facilities that we talked about earlier. This other major effect on your intakes is actually in your staff section, which you can see in the club screen. Go to staff, and the person that we're looking for in particular will be in your coaching team, and he will have the job of head of youth development. Now, if we go to that coaching team and we have a look, our head of youth development at the club is Thomas Broik. If we look at him, nowadays in Football Manager, your staff no longer have a rating of 1 to 20. It's now done on a word basis, but what we're looking for is a head of youth development that has a very good rating for working with youngsters, judging player ability and judging player potential. Now, I say very good, I actually meant that in the general terms, but if it can actually say that in Football Manager, that is obviously a good thing, but even better is if they are outstanding. Now, the 3 attributes that really take an effect on your youth intake. The first one, judging player potential. As you can imagine, the better Thomas Broik's ability in that area, the more likely he's going to be to get correct assumptions about how far a young player can go, and the same with judging player ability, except this is all about their current ability as opposed to their potential. So the better your head of youth development is in those areas, the better he is at identifying talent, and therefore the better he will be at bringing through the right players in your youth intake. And the same goes for working with youngsters. The better that is in general, the better your youth intakes will be, because in theory, behind the scenes, he's working really closely with them, he's really good at it, and therefore those players might feel a push to be better. I don't know the exact mechanics under the hood of what's working, but to sum it up, if this is good, that's a good thing for you. But there are some other things that people don't know play a major effect in your head of youth development's ability to produce a good youth intake. The first one is his personality, which is shown here as fairly ambitious. Now, the way that this works is the better the personality of your head of youth development, the more likely your players that come through in the intakes are to have a good personality too. So if your head of youth development was a model citizen, there's a good chance that a lot of the players that he picks up for his youth intake will be people with their head switched on with good personality. Model citizens, determined young players, whereas the opposite, if you had, and I always use him as the example, but let's say it was Mario Balotelli as your head of youth development with a bad personality, that is also going to rub off on those players that are working under him in those under 14s, under 15s, and by the time they come through in your intake, the worse personalities they're going to have, they're going to be less determined, worse professionals, and therefore less likely to reach their potential. So you want to make sure you've got a good personality on your head of youth development, as well as the actual 3 attributes highlighted, because then you've got a better chance of those players that come through having a good personality, good potential, good ability, and all round have a better chance to be a star for your team in the future. The The other thing that takes a big effect on the head of youth development is their preferred formation. Players that they get in your youth intakes will likely fit the formation that are their preferred ones. So in this case, he likes 4-2-4 and a 4-4-2. So you might see, because of this, in your intakes, instead of getting, let's say, a left winger, because he likes a 4-4-2, you might see some left mids and right mids come through. The same way if this said 5-3-2 or something like that, the more likely you are to have wing-backs come through in your system and central midfielders as opposed to left and right mid. So whilst it isn't the be-all and end-all, you do kind of want to make sure you've got a head of youth development whose formation also matches up with either what you're playing or what you'd like to play, because the closer the match these players are to the roles that you want them for your team, the more likely they are to get game time and eventually progress. But that's not to say it's the end of the world, because at the end of the day, if a left mid comes through, you could retrain him to a left winger. It's not exactly the be-all and end-all, but it certainly does help. Now we get onto the things that might have an effect, but I can't necessarily prove, but a lot of people have said that they think it's had the big effect, so we'll talk about that. And that is the nation and reputation of the head of youth development. Now, I really don't think reputation has that much of an effect. Nation, maybe it does. Some people have said they get better intakes if they have the same nationality head of youth development as what their club is. I can't say for sure if that is the case or not. I haven't seen anything from Sports Interactive confirming any of these things, whereas everything else we spoke about has been confirmed over the years by Sports Interactive. So if anyone has an article that proves it or whatever, I don't know. But I have heard some people say they'd be in a Dortmund save, for example, in Germany, but have an English head of youth development, and then suddenly some English players start coming from their academy. Is it linked? Possibly. I'm not 100% sure. And the same also goes for scouting knowledge, which you can see on the scouting section. To me, this makes sense as a prospect, but again, I can't prove this one. But some people say that if your head of youth development doesn't have a certain knowledge of the team that he's coming to, that's going to affect his youth intakes. For example, if we bought him to, say, Chelsea, he has no scouting knowledge of Chelsea and therefore wouldn't know the area so well and maybe wouldn't bring through better young players. So a lot of people swear by the rule of having the same nationality and scouting knowledge of the correct nation that you're managing in, but I'm not so sure it has an effect, but I'm going to mention it anyway, just for you guys that will say it does. It's something to at least bear in mind. But FM26 is certainly a quirky game with a few bugs here and there, and one thing that you might see affecting your saves that many of us will miss and gloss over is if you get a new head of youth development. So if you don't know, you can actually go and hire your staff. You can go out and search for new staff members to bring in. And let's say you did bring in a new head of youth development. You would assume he would then take over the job of youth recruitment and your youth intakes, but this isn't the case. The reason I know about this is this happened in my save when I got a new director of football. I noticed that he wasn't doing his job, and the same will happen with your head of youth development unless you go to the responsibilities section and make sure he's doing his job. So what you want to do is click responsibilities in the club screen and then go to advice and reports, and what you will see in there, if we scroll down, is there will be one that says bringing through the next generation of youth players through the ranks at your club. Who is doing that? Well, currently it's Thomas Broik, our head of youth development, but if we sacked him and brought in someone else, you would assume the game would automatically pick that guy as the new person to do that job, but it doesn't. It will go to someone else in default after they've been fired. So let's say you're under 19s manager or your assistant manager, and if you then bring in that new staff member and don't go and set this, it's still going to be this guy doing the intakes, despite the fact you would have a really good head of youth development that you brought in specifically for that job. So make sure they are doing it, as what will happen is, in this case, someone like Filip Tapalovic here will be doing the job, and as you can see, he's not very good at it, and that's going to affect your intake. So make sure your head of youth development is in charge of it by pressing that button in the responsibilities screen. So whilst it is a lottery, we can improve our chances by increasing your facilities, by enhancing your club's reputation, and getting in a head of youth development with good attributes, a good personality, and a preferred formation that suits yourself. But what else can we do? Well, now we're getting into the things that make slight effects but can have a big difference in your saves. And this is one I did not know until last year, and it's all about affiliate clubs. I spoke about this in FM24, and so many people were like, oh, it makes sense. And it's also why I've picked Borussia Dortmund as this example. Because if we go to club and then to affiliates, you will see any team in the world can potentially have affiliated clubs, whether it be Borussia Dortmund 2 or a team like BVB North Texas, who they just have a mutually beneficial relationship with. There's Birium United as well, who Dortmund have agreed a deal to share the club's scouting knowledge, which in turn increases Dortmund's presence in Thailand. But it doesn't stop there, because there's some relationships that you can get, i.e. Marconi Stallions, an Australian team who do all those similar things, merchandise sales, share scouting knowledge, but this affiliation, as you can see, allows players from Stallions, their academy players, to train at Dortmund and gain experience. And Dortmund may benefit from this, with some of them players coming through in their youth team ranks. And when I read this in FM24, it made so much sense, because I had seen lots of Australian new gen players coming through at Dortmund, and I did not understand why. Why is a German club having 15-year-old academy players coming through as Australian? Well, it's because of this affiliation that they have with Marconi Stallions, and you can actually get a similar affiliation with a club of your choosing by clicking request new affiliate and then going through and choosing one of these options. Now, the one that you want to pick for this kind of affiliate is the one that says it will give us a chance to recruit foreign youngsters. Now, it seems that Dortmund are okay in their current situation, but the longer you've been at a club, the more sway you have, the more chance you have of this going through. In this case, I have, on my first day, said I really want it. They've said it's close to your heart, and they're going to grant the request. Now, what will happen is in a few weeks' time, they will come back for an affiliate club. As you can see, they're doing a search, and they will find a few teams, maybe a Belgian side, a Brazilian side, whatever, and I'll have to pick one of them to then be the affiliate. And what that will then do is give us a chance of a Belgian player coming through in our Dortmund intake, a Brazilian player. It might only happen every few seasons, but that one player that comes through could be the wonder kid that changes everything in your save. Whether you're Dortmund or you're Stockport, either way, having these affiliates is a good thing to do, and you can add as many as you want as time goes on. The more you have like this, the more chances there are of different players coming in your intake. And again, imagine it like that youth recruitment net. You are making your net bigger, you're entering more lottery tickets, and you're giving yourself more of a chance of sweeping up the wonder kids and having a golden generation. But there's one myth that I want to bust, and this particularly applies for lower league saves. So if we take a team like Stockport, for example, let's say you were managing them, Stockport County, over in EFL League One. Here I was thinking they're a Vanarama National League team. I obviously don't know my football lower leagues enough, but let's imagine Stockport, a lower down team here, you start managing them, and you get a youth intake in your first season, and it's a golden generation. And then after that, you never get a golden generation again. There is a big myth in FM that people think your first intake is always your best, and it always seems to be, I got a golden generation in year one, and not after that. But there's a reason that this is, and it's not to do with bad luck or good luck. What it is, as I mentioned earlier, every player that you get in your team, their star ratings are reflective of each other. So a player that comes through in Man City's academy is being compared to Erling Haaland. So in the same way, at Stockport here, in your first season, your team might not be very good, and you might get a couple of good youngsters come through who in comparison look like great stars with 5-star potential who could be the same level as those players in your Stockport team currently. But then, 2 years into your save or so, you'll now have Stockport in the Championship. You'll have some real good talents, maybe some wonder kids from abroad, some players that you picked up on a free. And suddenly, because you've raised the bar, when those academy players come through, there's less chance that they are going to be of the same level of some of those players in your team. And therefore, the better your club gets, the less likely you're going to be to have a golden generation. I hope that makes sense, because the same at Dortmund, for us to have a golden generation, we would need 2 or 3 players with first team potential. But first team potential at Dortmund isn't just, able to play in the Vanarama National League. They need to be as good as, say, a Carney Chukwuemeka, who in his own right is a good player, but is only considered 2.5 stars at the club. So as you increase your team's ability, that bar you're setting is getting higher for those young players that are coming through, and therefore, it's less likely that those wonder kids are going to look as good in comparison, but it doesn't actually mean your youth intake has been any worse than what it was previously. They're just being compared to better players. So do bear all of that in mind. It's a bit of a myth that people seem to think your first season is always your best youth intake. It's not quite true. And the final thing, and one of the most important factors in your youth intake that we're covering today, and in fact it's the only other thing I know that has an effect, and it is under the hood, something you'll never be able to know about the game, and it's all about youth rating and game importance. Now, every single nation in the game, under the hood, using the pre-game editor only, has a rating for certain factors. So, game importance is one, aka how important is the game of football to that nation. So Brazil, England, Germany, they love football. Their game importance is going to be higher than a nation, say, I don't know, China, right? They're maybe not as interested in football over there. They've got other sports that they're maybe more interested in, and therefore the game importance is lower. In theory, less kids playing the game, and therefore less chance of wonder kids coming through in said nation. So if you're managing a Brazilian team to a Chinese team, even with the exact same facilities and setup, the Brazilian team's going to have more of a chance of producing top young players because there's less people playing the game in China as there's less game importance. The same goes for youth rating. The higher the youth rating of a nation, and every nation has one on a rating of 1 to 200, but the higher rating that is, the more likely a nation is of producing young players. So Brazil, Argentina, England, the reason you see so many wonder kids in them nations is because the youth rating is high. There's great facilities everywhere, pitches to play on, balls to use, whereas a nation like Gibraltar, for example, won't have such a high youth rating as there's less facilities and whatnot, and therefore there's less chance of good young players coming through in Gibraltar and top talents coming through there. So your youth rating and your game importance rating for a nation that you're managing in will have an effect, and therefore therefore, if you're managing in Germany, your youth intakes will be better than if you're managing in Gibraltar, despite all the efforts that you put in. Now, youth ratings can fluctuate over the years, but it can take a very, 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 very long time. We're talking decades worth of FM time just to get that youth rating up slightly, so don't really bank on that. Most of you won't get far enough in a save to actually see the youth rating take an effect, but if you want to get that up, you basically have to make your nation better. So in Gibraltar, if you suddenly started winning the Champions League with a Gibraltar team, that youth rating would slowly increase as more eyes went on football in the nation. So bear that in mind. There is also the economic factor of a country as well. The higher the economic factor on a rating of 1 to 20, the more money a nation has, and therefore, again, that's going to help with facilities and whatnot and the chance of producing youngsters. And with all of that, that's not to say that you couldn't get a Gibraltar wonder kid coming through, but in a German team, in a German nation, you're more likely to get good young players coming through than you would be in those nations because of that youth rating and game importance. So there's some things you can manage, some things you can't. It's sometimes just based on where you are, sometimes based on your facilities and your head of youth development. But if you combine every tip I've given you today, you increase your chances of that golden generation, and fingers crossed, you'll get some good youth players coming through in your intakes. It's been a lot of talking. Let me know down below if you've got any comments, and if you want to check more of me out, I do have my own channel linked in the description where we do more Football Manager content. I'd appreciate any support over there. But I'll stop yapping now. I've done a lot and I'm getting out of breath and I need a drink of water. So I'll see you in the next one, and fingers crossed, you'll get a good golden generation on your next intake day.